This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by MagnaGrip, America's choice for clean air. Eliminate 100% of airborne toxins from within the station with MagnaGrip. Learn more at magnagrip.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. I am your host, Aaron Zamzo. With me today is the editor-in-chief, Janelle Fosquet, and a very, very special guest, one that I'm kind of geeking out about and could talk to for hours, and one that I think every single member of the fire service needs to take note of and thank if you ever see him. It's Dr. Jeff Burgess, one of the most well-known fire service researchers who has been fighting to provide data, which can provide funding and awareness for us out in the front lines on cancer research, PFAS exposure, and is now getting into some sleep and more health and wellness, but has been just a beacon of support behind the scenes for the fire service for many years. And he's also the director for the Center of Firefighter Health Collaborative Research at the Mel and Enid Zuckerman College of Public Health at the University of Arizona. He's worked collaboratively with firefighters on health-related research for over 30 years, as mentioned, and since 2015, mainly on firefighter exposures, carcinogenic mechanisms, and interventions to reduce our cancer risks. And I think that can also transfer into other health-related issues and risks. And he's built a research facility there in Arizona. I had a chance to tour it, and I was kind of messing around a little bit about, he's got all this blood that has been basically taken that they can continually do research on. And of course, I was the jerk who was like, hey, I'll pull the plug and just joke around. I don't think Dr. Burgess thought that was too funny. But he's here with us. And so, Doc, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the program. Like I said, it's an honor to have you here. And I want to say on behalf of myself and hopefully a lot of members of the fire service, thank you for what you've been doing for us.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate the chance to talk today. And it's really all the partnership with the fire service. So all the things you just talked about came about because of questions from the fire service and working with fire service research champions to get the research done and the information out.
What made you, you could have probably made a lot of money in another field, right? It's our gain, but really you could have made a lot of money. So what really made you start to do research and look at the fire service and say, hey, this is where I want to dedicate my time and my efforts?
Well, I used to work emergency medicine, medical toxicology, OCMED, so taking care of individuals, including firefighters. And so I guess I came to the realization when I was working one late night shift in an emergency department, this is up in Washington State, that through research, hopefully I could have more of an impact than just taking care of people individually. So, that was really the turning point. And then I've just really enjoyed working with firefighters. They're a great group. And, they're willing to do something about, they want to know more about their exposures, and they're willing to do something about it. And you couldn't find better research partners than that.
Well, and you've been doing this now for 30 years. And here's the question it's been eating away at me for years. What do you want every firefighter to know? Based on all the different findings, what should we really know?
Well, I think it's a great question. For me, it comes down to two big categories. One is exposure reduction. So, look for ways you can reduce your exposure to all sorts of chemicals. So not just at the fire ground, but we'll hopefully talk about PFAS a little bit today, those forever chemicals. And then the other thing is take good care of yourself. And, that means, eat right. So Mediterranean diet, if you can do it, right? And then sleep, do things that you enjoy, keep your stress low if you can. So just take good care of yourself. And I think by doing those two things, you can really decrease your risk of a number of diseases.
What's the biggest surprise you've had from the research that when you said, oh, I didn't think I would see that?
We've had a lot of surprises. But one was early on when we were working with Tucson Fire Department, and we were looking at this certain set of markers called microRNA. And microRNA is an epigenetic outcome or a marker, and it's like flipping a switch in terms of turning on and off gene expression. And we were looking at differences between incumbents and recruits, adjusting for things like age, et cetera. And I just couldn't believe that everything that went up, pretty much everything that went up in the incumbent firefighters was an oncogene, increasing their risk of cancer, and everything that went down were tumor suppressors. So when you decrease levels of tumor suppressors, you also increase your risk of cancer. And you just rarely find such a consistent picture. Usually it's mixed. You see a little bit of everything. So I looked at that and it was just, it unfortunately, was an outcome that showed that firefighters truly are at increased risk of cancer. And I wish we weren't finding it. I wish that we look into something and not find, something that the firefighters needed to address. But that right there was one surprising thing for me.
And so that kind of you mentioned PFAS, and I know it's been a topic in the fire service. I mean, a lot of people are starting to hear PFAS. Can you give us a 101 on PFAS, why we should understand what they are, and really how that drives your research?
Sure. So we're addressing PFAS chemicals because the fire service asked us to do it, right? So that's why we kind of got into this. PFAS are also known as forever chemicals. And the reason for that is they stick around for a long time, both in the environment and in the body of the firefighter. So there are tens of thousands or more PFAS chemicals. It depends upon different definitions you can use. But really anything that's got a carbon-fluorine bond, and that carbon-fluorine bond is really, really strong and is resistant to breakdown. And so there's, again, many different types of the PFAS chemicals, and we tend to focus on the ones that are legacy PFAS that were produced in large amounts and perhaps less so now. But there's a lot more PFAS than even the ones that we're routinely studying. The reason that you should care about PFAS is they're associated that, first of all, we've shown that they're higher levels in firefighters. So for certain PFAS chemicals, particularly PFHXS and PFOS, they tend to have some of the highest levels in anyone, because they're in everyone pretty much in the US, but they're at higher levels in firefighters. And we found, for example, maybe 18 to 26% higher levels comparing Arizona firefighters to non-firefighters, to other essential workers in the state. But we've even found higher levels comparing, firefighters in different parts of the country to kind of a comparison group that the CDC puts out called NHANES. So we know it's up in firefighters, and we know that they have toxic effects. Recently, IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, looked at PFOA, which is probably the worst one, and PFOS, which I mentioned was up in firefighters, and found that PFOA is a group 1 carcinogen, just like firefighting is. It's associated with testicular cancer and also kidney cancer. But beyond that, these PFAS have a whole bunch of other effects. They have immunosuppressant effects, they have developmental effects, they have effects on your thyroid. So they do like a whole bunch of bad things to you. So for all those reasons, firefighters should care about PFAS.
And when you test, you're testing blood
Yes,
for those levels?
Yeah, and specifically the serum in the blood. So if you take blood and you clot it, right, the clear stuff that's left, that's the serum. And so that's what we're testing for the PFAS chemical.
And is this research what went towards getting firefighting classified as a class 1 carcinogen?
Yeah, no, it is. And the group 1 carcinogen designation for firefighting did have some component of the PFAS exposures in it, but it was really that I think, was separate, if you will. Our contribution to that was separate. So I was fortunate enough to be present at the initial IARC review of firefighting, back now well over 15 years ago. And then again in 2022 when they met. And the first time that we met, and this is in Lyon, France, this is where they always have the meetings, and they bring a bunch of experts, together, including epidemiologists, and those are the ones that actually look at cancer rates in firefighters. And I think they're probably the most important group in any IARC monograph, such as firefighting. So back then we had fewer studies, but we really lacked information about the way that firefighting caused cancer. And so I took that message home, and over the years between those two meetings, we really pushed to understand how that happened, or what was that link. And our focus had been on epigenetic markers. Again, those are things that change gene expression without changing the underlying DNA sequence. And when you asked me that really surprise thing, that microRNA was one of those that we were really surprised about. And we also found changes over 2 years. First 2 years of firefighting, we saw a change towards a pattern that showed an increased risk of cancer. We also found the same thing in DNA methylation, which also turns on and off genes. So we were finding this with firefighting, and we provided that information to IARC. They looked at everything that had been done for firefighters up until about May of that year of 2022, and including our research. And they then, using our research and others, found 5 ways that firefighting exposures can cause cancer where they had strong evidence, which is the highest level, including these epigenetic markers. So that was some of our main contribution to that determination. So sorry about the long-winded explanation.
But I think this is stuff that every firefighter and your research is on volunteers, it's on career, it's on female firefighters, and you're kind of relating the PFAS exposure to different types of cancers, but I think it's something where we hear it, but we don't really understand, okay, what does it do? And what you're saying is that the high level of PFAS can actually change our genetic makeup a little bit, or activate some of the bad genes, and deactivate some of the genes that can help, or the cells that can help fight tumors. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. I think you and so one thing I want to make sure, because we're talking about PFAS, and then Janelle asked about kind of IARC, right? Mm-hmm. And so one thing that's really important, I think we need to start with that, is that PFAS is just one exposure among many that can cause harm to firefighters. So it's not the only thing, it's just one of many. So that's but I think different than, kind of many of the other chemicals that cause cancer that firefighters are exposed to, those you tend to see more at the fire ground, right? That's the smoke and soot. And so those are nasty chemicals, and they need to be controlled. PFAS exposure you can get at the fire ground, but in other areas as well too. So there's other ways you can help reduce your exposures to PFAS. So that I just wanted to make that clear. Mm-hmm. Now, Aaron, what you had said is true also for the PFAS. We have found that PFAS chemicals change those same things, those microRNAs and those DNA methylation in firefighters. So, for example, we found that if you have higher levels of PFAS chemicals, and again, studies just in firefighters, that it ages your cells. It's called accelerated epigenetic age. So, all right, we use that by measuring these biological or epigenetic clocks, that you can look at using DNA methylation. And we've shown that higher levels, again, PFAS, cause your cells to be older, and also increases methylation in genes known to be associated with cancer and other diseases. So we're seeing multiple effects. The concern about all of these is that they're associated with disease, and particularly the epigenetic clocks. If your cells are older than you are, then you're at increased risk for all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disorders, multiple different things. And furthermore, for the PFAS and microRNA, we're seeing changes. I just made a note here to myself so I can make sure I remember these things correctly, that the microRNA expression with higher levels of PFAS were in patterns associated with cancer, thyroid disease, and autoimmune disorders and adverse neurological outcomes. So we're seeing all of those things with elevated PFAS levels in firefighters.
And I like a Forrest Gump approach too. I think, right. I think you could probably link, just assuming like lower testosterone levels in male firefighters, right? We know that there's a link to reproductive issues in female firefighters, and I believe there's some coming out about male firefighters and reproduction as well. Is that correct? Or
we have not specifically within the firefighter cancer cohort study been looking at male reproductive health. We've been focusing on female reproductive health and female firefighters, obviously. But there is an investigator named Luke Montrose. He's out of Colorado State University, and he's been doing work looking at sperm in wildland firefighters. This is research that was funded by NIOSH. And so he's been really pushing that kind of area of research. And I don't know what results he's found yet, but I know he's been collecting samples and been looking into analyzing them.
And you mentioned something that I really wanted to push out to our listeners, which is the firefighter cancer cohort study. And the wonderful people that, obviously yourself and your team, we're going to leave a link to that. Janelle will put that in the show notes, just because this list, there are literally, I think, 50, 60, I don't know, even hundreds of different research articles that you guys have there that you've been involved with. Can you give me just a little overview of that and why everybody needs to understand what the cancer cohort study is and some of the team members there? I know one of our favorites, you and I have our guy, John, we want to give a shout out to him as well, but can you just give us an overview of that?
Sure. So thank you for starting with John. So Captain John Galata of Tucson Fire is the reason why we have a firefighter cancer cohort study today. So what happened was Tom Quisnell, who was a fire cause investigator with Tucson Fire, died of leukemia. And despite it being on the presumptive cancer list for the state of Arizona, his claim was still turned down. And it was turned down, I think because of lack of knowledge of the people that were doing the claims, but also lack of information that we needed to help support the claims at that time. So he came up with three major questions. What exposure do firefighters have and where? What effects do those exposures have that can lead to cancer, increased cancer risk? That same mechanism question, that we were already talking about. And then what can we do about reducing the exposures? And so that, with that, we went to FEMA, got funded, worked together to address all those questions, and came up with tons of information, including that information on the epigenetic effects that help to support the IARC determination that firefighting, is a group 1 carcinogen, that firefighting as an occupation causes cancer. So because that worked so well, we enrolled over 500 Tucson firefighters in that study. Everyone was behind it. The administration, the IFF local, the individual firefighters, everybody. We thought, this worked really well. We should make this opportunity available to other firefighters. So with that, we talked with other fire departments around the country, and we put in a proposal to FEMA, and they funded it, and they've been funding additional studies since, and so has the National Institutes of Health. The IFF has also funded various parts of it as well. States, state of North Carolina is funding Dr. Heather Stapleton. She's a wonderful person to talk with. She's the silicone wristband expert.
Mhm.
So she's a great person to talk with. They funded Rutgers to work with volunteer firefighters. We've got a great team. They funded Dr. Alberto Caban Martinez at University of Miami to look at various groups like trainers, et cetera. So we all work together to create this network where whenever you enrolled somebody, you got a certain set of information, the blood samples, like you saw, Aaron, also urine that we store. So now we can follow firefighters through their career, every 2 years getting blood, every year doing some surveys to see, have you gotten cancer, what things have changed in your work, things like that. So we can now answer all sorts of questions. We have about 8,000 firefighters now, 31 states across the country, hundreds of fire departments, and answering multiple different questions. Airport firefighters, female firefighters, wildland firefighters, WUI, you name it. So this is something that we can all, we can use it to effectively make research run faster, more efficiently, right? And build the whole so that we can answer bigger questions.
Doc, is the cohort study something that an individual firefighter can participate in, or do they have to be part of a department that is partnered with one of the organizations you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Currently, and I think really given our study design, we need the firefighter to be part of a department because we do collect information from the departments on the number of fires they've been to, the number of fire hours, ideally additional information as well. And so we also, just to kind of make it work, need to be able to go to a location and collect blood and urine every 2 years. And we need those research liaisons that work with the individual fire departments to help us organize that. So a fire department collaborating with us, that fire department has to, share their resources in terms of their personnel time, right, and locations to be able to make this happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Can departments reach out to you and say, hey, we'd like to try to support and be a part of this? Or what is that process?
Absolutely. We've had a number of departments reach out to us. So we were actually already working with the women firefighters in San Francisco, for example, but their cancer foundation, right, which is associated with their union, recently asked us to do a study looking at a nutraceutical called Brockshot. So its active ingredient is sulforaphane, and they thought, hey, this stuff may be helpful for firefighters. So we're in the stages right now of analyzing the information from that. So some firefighters took this nutraceutical, some did not. And working with Dr. Jackie Goodrich at University of Michigan, again, been a wonderful partner as part of our larger network, is, hopefully we'll have some information back to them pretty soon on some of these outcomes. But there's an example of a fire department reaching out and saying, we really want to do this. And in that case, they were actually able to provide funding for it too, which is wonderful, because that's the other side too, right? We need both the departments that are interested and the ability to get funding. And that's usually our work as academics to look for it. But we welcome having fire departments reach out.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes in a snap. Visit magnagrip.com to download MagnaGrip's free grant guide with expert tips to solidify a grant for essential safety equipment, such as MagnaGrip's exhaust removal systems. That's magnagrip.com to download the free guide.
Have you seen a shift in kind of focus? Because I think, it looks like a lot of the research that you were originally involved with was just saying, hey, yeah, there is a correlation between cancer and firefighters and PFAS levels. And I've looked at a lot of the research now coming out 24, 25. Now we're looking at interventions to try to reduce those PFAS levels. And it seems like you're moving to all right, here we proved the problem. Now we're looking for solutions. Am I correct with that assumption?
Yes, I mean, it's a complex picture because we know that firefighting causes cancer, right? I mean, we know that, but we there still are questions, and I also recommend that all the firefighters look into the National Firefighter Registry for cancer, right?
Yes, please
Um, and
register
and
for that.
and
Yep.
so that's a really important study. They're going to have, hopefully, if they're fully enrolled, they'll have like 200,000 firefighters in the study. They can look at really detailed questions in a way that no one could before. And we're aiming for about 10,000 in our study. So we're, as I told you, we're around 8,000 now. Um, so we can look at things like mechanisms, but they can look at big questions too. So anyone can do that. It doesn't have to be department centric, right? So that is a great opportunity for folks. But so we know certain things, but there are many questions remaining. And unfortunately, research has that outcome often where you have as many questions, if not more, after you come out than when you started. But you mentioned reproductive health, Aaron. So we're really now, I think, starting to understand a lot more about what were the adverse reproductive outcomes, what are the risk factors for it. Neurodegenerative effects are on the horizon. We're already seeing research showing that that's starting, that that's occurring, but we need to know a lot more about it. However,
Alzheimer's disease and
well,
such. I mean,
yeah, yeah. I think Alzheimer's is definitely one, and there's some information there. I think with dementia in general, with the responders to the World Trade Center, if you had heavier exposures, I think they published on that recently, showing that you had a higher, rate of dementia. And we're starting to see some markers, these epigenetic markers that are associated with neurodegenerative outcomes as well. But dementia is just one of them. So anyhow, I think that there still needs to be research understanding kind of basic mechanisms, but we also need to be providing answers about what firefighters can do at the same time. And one of those things, back to Tucson, was they chose to put engineers on air and do the on-scene washdown. And so putting engineers on air, and that was all on the Tucson Fire Department crew led by Captain John Galata.
yeah.
To get people to do that, that reduced the PAH exposure, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are a generally used marker of smoke exposure, by 40% in the folks that did it. The on-scene washdown, which other people might call decon, but where you just, before you doff any of your gear, when you still have your regulator in place, etc., just the soap and water, right, and a brush, we showed that reduced the PAHs by about 36%. So those are some of the first interventions we did.
Yeah.
Now,
So can I just put an exclamation point to that? So you're putting the apparatus engineer at the pump panel. You're putting them on air, and you're finding that that's reducing the PFAS levels in their blood by 36%.
Well, no, that was the pH levels.
Oh, the pH. I'm sorry.
Yeah, in their urine.
Okay.
By 36%. So, and that's a measure of both inhalation and getting it on your skin, but probably for the engineers, more inhalation.
Okay.
For the entry teams, obviously they got a lot more dermal exposure as well.
Yeah, but then doing the washdown is reducing that exposure by 40%.
36%.
36%. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are two things that we can do right there. Anybody listening can do these two things right now. If you're boom, the tones go off, you go on a fire call. We can do that. We should all be doing that right now to this day. I just want to emphasize that there is an easy intervention that you're finding reduces things.
Yes. Yeah. And I think also if anyone wants to find out more, they can reach out to Captain John Galata of Tucson Fire. Again, he identified this intervention. It wasn't me. He convinced the engineers, to be able to participate in this and to do it. It was entirely voluntary. All of our studies are. And he'll tell you stories now about firefighters, even though the study is ended, to just do it because, they want to be there to walk their daughter, when their daughter gets married down the aisle. I mean, so they've got good reasons for doing this, and they found a way. Firefighters are problem solvers. I mean, it's really impressive. And they found a way to do their work and wear their SCBA at the same time.
Yeah. We're also resistant to change. So some people right now are shaking their head going, I can't do that. But, I was there in Tucson, and I was toured a couple stations, and John, was able to orchestrate a nice tour of your facility. And after seeing and talking to the researchers, to me, there's no reason to not be on air anywhere around that fire ground, even on Overhaul, correct?
Yeah, it's an interesting story about Overhaul. That was one of the first things we looked at years and years ago. I think probably over 20 years ago now, well before any of this started. And this is working with Don Bolstead Johnson, who's an industrial hygienist who was with Phoenix Fire at the time. And we measured exposures during Overhaul. And one of the things we found, among many dangerous chemicals, was asbestos, and measured it during Overhaul. And that just shows, right. And one of the cancers that occurs at the highest rate, at the most increased rate of firefighters. It's not the most common cancer. Those would be things like lung cancer and prostate cancer and colon cancer. But the one with the highest percentage increase in firefighters compared to the general population is mesothelioma. And that is from asbestos exposure. And I am convinced that the majority of that exposure comes from unprotected overhaul, from not wearing your SCBA during overhaul. So when someone asks me what's the one first thing that I would suggest any fire department do, it's really try to do their best to have their firefighters be protected during overhaul. We've known that for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So I think, but that's just one example that I can clearly link. And one particular phase of firefighting with an exposure and a disease.
Yeah. Well, that lithium ion batteries also off gassing now is just another reason to be on air during overhaul. I tell my crew, I'm like, look, we're already there. We're already on air. Let's just, think about it as a workout. Might as well stay on and breathe that thing down as far as you can, safely. And just stay on it. There's no reason to not. And of course, I'm very lucky. I get to talk to wonderful people like yourself and to tour your facility. And then, we also have some great people from the Firefighter Cancer Support Network who are really reiterating this. So I think listeners, one of the biggest takeaways, listen to Dr. Burgess, wear your SCBA as often as you can, especially through overhaul. Can we dig into some of the other interventions? If you were in my shoes as a fire officer, knowing what you know, what other precautions would you say, Zam, make sure your crew and you do this also?
Well, we are in the midst of, doing research on a number of interventions. And so we don't have all the data back on all of those yet. As you mentioned, we're doing some studies. We have a number of studies going on. But a few things I can think about, in addition to kind of like that on-scene washdown engineers on air that we mentioned. I think, so let's talk about PFAS for a second again. Let's go back to those forever chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that we know that have already been published, and we're finding some initial results that are similar, are that you can reduce your PFAS levels by giving plasma regularly, and to a lesser extent by giving blood. There's a great need for blood and plasma products. They're life-saving. Any potential risk of the person who receives it from the PFAS, because that's always a question we get, is much less than the potentially life-saving benefit of getting those blood products. And realize again that again the PFAS levels in firefighters are not that much higher than they are in the general population. So this is something that again is very beneficial, kind of just in general, and also for the firefighter. So that was a study out of Australia, done in Melbourne and the state of Victoria, where Melbourne is in Australia. And we are finding very similar results when we're looking at the predictors of that initial levels in the firefighters in our study. So we've looked at PFAS levels in over 2,000 firefighters, and that's one thing that we clearly know is beneficial.
So donating plasma like once a month? Is that,
Yeah, you can give, the study that they did every 6 weeks.
okay.
And they gave blood every 12 weeks.
Okay.
But, you can, if you go to one of the blood donation or plasma donation places, they'll allow you to do it more frequently, right? But you can work with them, and they have certain standards. But that's what we're looking at: plasma every 6 and blood every 12 weeks. And again, those are two separate groups and a comparison group. And that we finished that in Arizona, but we have other departments outside of Arizona that are still finishing up, and we hope that they should all finish up by the end of the year. And it will take us a little bit of time to put all the results together. But the predictors of the PFAS levels when they started the study, we're finding that same type of trend where if you said you were donating plasma before you even started our study, that you had lower levels. So just like the Australian one.
Wow.
The other thing that we found that we know from in general, from studies around the world, are that if you're still using the PFAS containing aqueous film forming foams or AFFF, then you're going to have higher levels of PFAS. So that's something that's known. So obviously, if you're still using it, you just they're working on replacements now. So there are replacements out there. They're not drop-in replacements. That's a whole different discussion and topic, right? But that is something that the firefighters can do to reduce their levels by not using the AFFF. Another thing that we're kind of finding in general is that there is PFAS contamination both of homes and station drinking water. And so I would say that any firefighter who's out there should check and see, is there PFAS contamination in your drinking water? Unless you have a well, in which case you should probably get it tested yourself just to make sure it's not contaminated. Your municipal system should be testing for it. And if they're finding it, I would say put a filter in place. There's a number of filters that are effective. Some places are using the reverse osmosis, units. That certainly works. Other filters I've heard work well as well. But again, I'm not an expert on the individual filters. But that's something else that folks can do. The other thing that we're finding some initial results, that same on-scene washdown appears to be associated with reduction in PFOA levels. And that's the one that's a known human carcinogen. So another reason to do on-scene washdown. We're also seeing that it looks like, again, initial, although we want to, and this makes sense for other reasons too, but we need to confirm it, that if you have carpet in your station, you may have higher level of at least one PFAS in your blood too. So it's a good reason to take carpet out of the living spaces, right, of stations, because we know that there's PFAS in, like historically used in the stain and water resistant coating on carpet. So again, not surprising, and also makes it a little bit harder to keep it clean. So these are all different things that can be done right now, and we'll hopefully have more, complete information as we're completing our study of the exact which PFAS are going down to what extent with each of these things.
Yeah, and we could go down a rabbit hole of what should I be, what supplements should I be taking, and when should I be eating this and not doing this. And you had mentioned Mediterranean diet. I know that there's some research on there that says that's probably one of the most healthy for us. Is that just due to the reduction in inflammation?
Yeah, I think that is definitely one. And then I think there's Mediterranean diet has less red meat to it, right, as well. And so, I think there's, specific components of the diet too that can adversely affect you. But inflammation is one of those important mechanisms by which exposures can cause cancer. And there is evidence of increased inflammation in firefighters in general. So it's kind of more put in that category of oxidative stress, which leads to inflammation.
Now, do PFAS, is there a correlation between the PFAS levels and inflammation?
There might be. I don't know the answer to that question, Aaron. I would have to look into it and see.
Anybody want to fund that research? Let's go.
Yeah.
I'm in, Doc. I'm in. I mean, personally, I just kind of look at, the physiology and some of the mechanisms. You like to think that there was a correlation there, correct? Like, but this goes back to so many questions. The more answers you get, the more questions you get, right? And you mentioned that you're like, the more we find out, the more we go, well, why? And that takes you down another road. And I think that leads to a great question is, where would you like to see this? And, if we were talking to Dr. Jeff Burgess, 5-10 years from now, when you're ready to hand the torch off, what would be a level? How would you measure success?
If we can reduce the risk, the rates and the risk of cancer and other diseases, adverse reproductive health, neurodegenerative diseases, other conditions like thyroid, etc. If we can reduce those in firefighters, then we will have been successful. I think really, what we're looking at now are kind of better, a whole bunch of different, areas that we're looking at. But one of the ones like we've been talking about right now is how can you reduce your exposures? That's a huge one. So if we can really provide really solid, workable solutions for firefighters, right? Or information to allow them to create their own solutions. That's one thing. And I think, we're making good progress there. If we can figure out how those exposures are causing cancer and other diseases and how we can stop or reverse that, that's another one. So you mentioned, inflammation, oxidative stress. That's something that, we are looking into now. And there may be ways, maybe there's some pill that you could pop in the future, right? In addition to having a healthy lifestyle, not instead of, but in addition to, they could help firefighters. Those are things that, we are starting to look into, like the thing with San Francisco, right? With that rock shot, for example. We'll see if it helps. It might, we don't know before we do the research. So having kind of providing firefighters with kind of a list of evidence-based things they can do to help protect themselves, I think would be success. And if we can kind of turn that into reduction overall in disease in the fire service.
Yep. And I think that's a lofty goal, but I think also based on all the progress that you've made already together, like that's kind of one of our goals too, is to make the fire service a more healthy, better working environment. And just, I think you mentioned a lot of things too, that people need to start taking a personal look at what they're doing outside of even the fire ground. A lot of the interventions you're seeing involve, hey, look into your own, what are you drinking? What are you eating? What are you doing to help solve the problem? I think sometimes too, we get, caught up in policy procedure, but there are these small, usable, tangible, actionable things that you've provided for us that we can do every single day to help reduce our risks of PFAS exposure and hence cancer. And so I think hopefully we're going to get more people on board with your goal, and hopefully we can continually bring you back, because I have looked at some of the research you have coming up, and I was super excited, and you wouldn't indulge me in it yet. So I think I'm just going to have to say, Doctor, we're going to have you back to talk about some of those other things and interventions. And as you continually try to, get the message out, I like to be an avenue for you to do that. And again, thank you so much for the time, but we're not done. I got one more good question for you, because you are essential to, I like to say, to the fire service and me, because your research is helping, people in the front line stay more healthy, stay more aware of our exposures. And and also those interventions. So we need you to be healthy. We need you to stay motivated. And so it all goes back to the essence of the program is, what are you doing to be better?
Oh gosh. You know, I try to walk the talk. So, we haven't talked that much about exercise, but obviously that's really important, right? Um, you know, try to eat healthy. Try to take a break too, just reduce. I think a lot of academics kind of work too hard. Firefighters do too. I mean, they work hard on shift, they work hard off shift, make sure. And this is something I could do better myself. Take a little more time for yourself, right? Um, and I think some of these things too are interesting too. I mean, I'm a skeptic. So when I hear about a new nutraceutical or something like that, my first thought is, oh, it probably doesn't work. But we have to test it, right? Need to find out. But I'm really excited to see if some of these things are working for firefighters. They may help people in the general population as well too. We may be able to help everybody through the research that we're doing collaboratively with firefighters. So those are the things I get pretty excited about, right? And also, again, just working with firefighters and the questions they ask, the stuff that they're willing to do. I mean, there are differences in the fire service now. The people are doing washdown they weren't before, right? I mean, there's all sorts of, they're wearing their SCBA more. That is so satisfying as a researcher to actually have something come out of the work that you're doing collaboratively. So I'm just that, that is really more important than you might realize. Because if you do stuff and nothing ever comes of it, well, why do it?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, my crew, I have 2 rules. You wear your seatbelt. Well, I actually have 3. I should say we're always wearing our seatbelts. We're always wearing our SCBAs. And if you got a problem with me, you can't talk about it behind my back until you say it to my face, because I can't get any better if you just talk smack at the kitchen table. So those are my 3 rules. And, one of those rules is because of the research you've done. So thank you for all that you've done for the fire service, and people are listening and paying attention. And I think it's really great to have you on the program. I'm hoping that a lot of people will have more questions, right? Because these questions can lead to more answers at some point. So Dr. Jeff Burgess, thank you so much for all you've done. Again, the open invite, I'd like to keep you coming on here as you keep developing things, so we can be like, your go-to program to explain in layman's terms. And thanks for not making it too scientific and over my firefighter brain. But I think everybody kind of can really understand what how you articulate everything. So thank you so much for that as well. So for all our listeners, hopefully you've taken some great, usable, tangible, actionable things back to, to your firehouses, back to your crews. Thank you so much for listening. You can check out a lot of the research that Dr. Burgess has been involved with. We're going to leave that in our show notes. You can also send us an email, bettereveryshift@firerescue1.com. And I think the essence of what the research is all about is trying to make us a healthier fire service, and one that we can continually try to progress on and then pass on, because the program and hopefully what you are all about is learning something, doing something, and sharing something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.